Rebel Wilson, who came out on social media. Now, there's a lot of speculation that she did it to get ahead of a tabloid story in the Sydney Morning Herald about her relationship. Now, the man who wrote it even apologized, saying it was never his intention to out her. Well, you know that's not true, because if it wasn't your intention, you wouldn't have done it. But is the only... I'm sorry.
Yes, this was the week where the reporting over the outing of Rebel Wilson sparked global outrage. Plus this week, Donald Trump in the dock. Washington lays out a case for the former president's plan to overthrow his election loss and the violent riot that followed. And Labor outlines how it really beat ScoMo. I'm James Law and this is Flash Drive. Now, you may have noticed that I'm leading the charge today because Georgie is taking a well-earned break. Now, we didn't want to leave you hanging, so I've brought in a good friend of mine to help unpack the week's events. Liz Burke, welcome to Flash Drive.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
It's good to have you. Thanks for coming in. So for people who don't know, Liz is the deputy editor at news.com.au. We worked together for many years.
Yeah.
Now we're back here together.
Here we are again.
Tell people a little bit about yourself.
Well, you know what my job is. Been in the news game for the past decade or so. Bit of time in magazines, in newspapers, now online, and my very first time as a flash driver. So this is very exciting.
Welcome. Thank you for coming in. So we've got a lot to discuss. Let's dive in. One of the biggest controversies of the week was all to do with Rebel Wilson, and certainly in media circles, it's all anyone's talking about. So you would have seen on Friday that it started with really happy news. Rebel Wilson went onto Instagram and revealed that she's got a girlfriend, which was applauded around the world. Then on Saturday, Andrew Hornery, a gossip columnist from the Sydney Morning Herald, came out and revealed that he had inquired to Rebel's people about this relationship a couple of days before, and then he wrote that Rebel had, quote, gazumped his story by revealing that she was in a relationship, a same-sex relationship. The story has sparked a fair bit of outrage. I think that Abby Chatfield was one of the people who kind of put it best. Here she is on her radio show.
As I'm sure a lot of you saw, Rebel Wilson came out. I was like, yes, Rebel, like...
Go Reb.
I don't know if she is pan, bi, or a lesbian. I don't know what she is, but queer queen. Well, I don't want some random journo
What's yours?
who's been digging in my life. It's my life,
Yeah.
and it's my story to tell. Don't out people in their same-sex relationships or in any kind of identity or anyone.
Abby, she doesn't hold back, does she? So, that was her view. And then the story actually went global. The New York Times reported on it. And as you would have heard at the top of the show, Whoopi Goldberg went ham on The View. Liz, what's your take on all of this controversy?
It's wild that less than a week ago, this started as a really good news story. I mean, we were all stoked for Rebel. She'd found her Disney princess. She was so happy. She has so many fans. Everyone was so excited for her. And we thought that would be it. Like, that was a big enough news story as it was on its own, right? And then, since then, it's erupted into a global scandal. I mean, it's just wild. And it's been a really wild ride because it's taken so many twists and turns. And so I think it first started getting a little bit murky when the columnist Andrew Hornery, I think even before he had published something about it, he was tweeting about it saying that, he had started making those inquiries. And so there's a question about whether he should have sent that email in the first place, should have been digging around her private life. And he and his editor have both defended that, saying, this is the work of a gossip columnist, this is what they do. And to be honest, I think that's fair enough. It's something that's of interest to his readers. If it was a male-female relationship, he'd be sending those emails saying, we've seen pictures of you with this person. There's people talking about the relationship. Do you want to confirm it or not? There was one line in his email, which he published, that I thought was a little bit murky, where he said, we have enough information to publish. So that, I think, was probably, if this is what caused it, was probably what tipped Rebel over the edge and thought, I've got to get ahead of this. And so that's where you start thinking, oh, maybe, you know, were the intentions not great? But I think the real issue is not with his inquiries, not even really with the column that he published afterwards explaining the kind of behind the scenes. I mean, that was a little bit gross. But to me, the issue is really in the defence of the column and it being so dismissive of the criticism. It seemed like, you know, both the columnist, the editor, speaking on behalf of the newspaper, just really didn't get what the problem was. And that obviously, you know, alienated a lot of their readers. And it's just, yeah, it's been really messy.
It has been pretty yucky. And you're right. So what was interesting about this is the story kept going for day after day after day, because it started on the Saturday with that, you know, that first column with the word gazumped, which, you know, everyone has latched onto.
Yeah.
And then once the backlash began, the attempt to kind of justify what they did began. And then, you know, days later, there's like one apology, then there was another apology a few days later. So, you know, we both work in the media, right? So, you know, far be it from us to criticise.
It's a bit close to home. It's a bit like there, but for the grace of God, go all of us here.
Right, because, you know, at the end of the day, he's a gossip columnist, and this is his job to kind of uncover this stuff. And it's not, you know, for people who aren't in the journalism world, it's not unusual, right, for you to send an email like that. We have a bit of information. We'd like to give you a right of reply. Please get back to us by this date. You know, that's standard
totally
practice. Fair. But like you say, some people have interpreted it as a gun to Rebel's head. Do you think that they outed her?
I think, well, that was one of the lines in what ended up being, you know, the actual apology, that they're saying it's false to claim that the Sydney Morning Herald outed Rebel or even intended to out Rebel. We don't even know if this, you know, if she had responded, if this column would have been published ahead of her making her own statement or not. So that's another thing that's really crazy to me. This thing that they're defending, it didn't even happen.
Right.
Just let it rest. It seems like a lot of the controversy kind of could have been avoided if they didn't try to defend the act that didn't really even follow through in the first place. But yeah, it also, another thing that's kind of really tricky is that part of the defence hinged on that line that we hadn't made the decision whether or not to publish. And really, it's gone further than that now.
Yeah.
Like, the scandal isn't about whether or not they published. The scandal was that they defended the publication of the, you know, the behind the scenes, like, will we or won't we, pressuring her into giving an answer.
Do you think it's different? So yeah, one of their defences was if it was a heterosexual relationship and we found out Rebel had a boyfriend, we would have taken the exact same path, you know, and that's what happens. Do you think it's different that it's same sex? Does that make
I really do. I think it does matter.
We have to be more sensitive.
I think it does matter, and it's not that it's just because, you know, that person should be the owner of that information and of their identity. I think, you know, if I was a journalist making those inquiries, or if I was an editor and had known that, you know, that a reporter in my newsroom was making those inquiries, you'd want to make it really clear that you say to the person, to the subject, we're not in the business of outing people. So, you know, we want you to, we're giving you an opportunity to comment on this. Do you want to share the information or not? But I feel like you have to make it really clear that that's not your intention.
Actually, that would have changed everything.
Exactly.
That one line in the email, it might have been a very, very different story.
But then, I mean, is that how they felt about it? Like, that's part of the controversy, whether or not that was the intention or not. So, yeah.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what happens next. Hopefully, for the SMH's sake, hopefully this is the end of it so they can get back to business. Remember, Flash drivers, if you're loving the podcast, let us know. Subscribe on your favourite podcast app, leave a review and tell your friends. To the States now, and the US Congress has kicked off a really interesting series of hearings about the January 6th Capitol riot and, crucially, what role Donald Trump played in sparking it.
As you will see in the hearings to come, President Trump believed his supporters at the Capitol, and I quote, "We're doing what they should be doing." This is what he told his staff as they pleaded with him to call off the mob, to instruct his supporters to leave. Over a series of hearings in the coming weeks, you will hear testimony, live and on video, from more than half a dozen former White House staff in the Trump administration, all of whom were in the West Wing of the White House on January 6th.
So Liz, I've been fascinated by this. I'm a bit of a Donald Trump nerd. I just, he's the most fascinating, world leader.
Yeah.
So I've been lapping up these hearings.
Look, I think there's a couple of different camps here. I know that I've been talking about these hearings with some of my colleagues as well, with friends, and I feel like there's people like you who are absolutely lapping it up, and there's other people who are a little bit more, more Trump. We're so over this. I'm probably, if I'm going to be totally honest, leaning a bit towards the latter camp.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
So what's really grabbed you about this, though? What do you think? What's the key piece of evidence that you find so interesting?
Look, the thing with Trump is always his just ability to, he's a bit Teflon, and his ability to say things and, to be honest, to lie and to distort the truth and kind of get away with it. The question for me is, are these hearings going to be enough to change that? But what's been fascinating so there's just been a couple of hearings so far where they've kind of laid out the case that they are going to try to prove in subsequent hearings. And they've kind of produced it like a TV show. Yeah. So, there they are, and they're in the Congress, and they've got a panel of experts and witnesses, and then they throw to these slick video packages of all the interviews they've done in the past year. And it's just like a roll call of people discrediting Donald Trump. And, it takes you inside the White House, crucially on the days where the results were coming out and, how everyone reacted. It culminated for me in even his daughter, Ivanka Trump, saying, look, I don't believe that the election was stolen. There was no evidence to that fact. And then, Trump has to come out and respond to his own daughter, disbelieving him. So it's been fascinating. And, hearing the Attorney General say that Trump was detached from reality about the results. It's clear to me on election night, Trump just thought that they were in a winning position and didn't believe the numbers that were coming through. And so what did he do? He just kind of made it up. It's no, I think I was going to win, so therefore I won. Yeah. And so it'll be interesting to see. I mean, we're in Australia, so far removed from it. We've moved on from Trump. America's still trying to deal with it. And so interesting for me to see how much this is cutting through for them. Yeah,
but really important too to go over those January 6th riots, which were such a massive thing at the time, but I feel like it was also in the thick of such a crazy news cycle. So there was that, there was COVID, there was China, there was other stuff going on in the US that was race related as well. And then, since then, it feels like it's been such a relentless news cycle. Mm-hmm. It's kind of good to, go back and get that perspective and kind of recall, hey, wait, this is actually a really, really crazy thing that happened.
Exactly.
I'm going to be so interested too, because now that all of this evidence is coming out, and it's kind of, a lot of people would have thought that, there's no way that the election was rigged. We all know kind of what was going on in Donald Trump's head, just being really dismissive of all the facts, which he loves to be. Mm-hmm. And he's going to have to somehow respond to this. And is it just going to be his usual dismissing of the facts? It's going to be fascinating.
Well, and look, so far that has been his approach. He released a long statement about the hearings and pretty much didn't address any of the claims that were put, and just said the election was stolen. This is trying to distract from Biden's terrible presidency. Yeah. So, that might be a clue about how we'll deal with it. But, there's some people who are speculating that there may be enough evidence to try to charge Trump with something, which as if that's the end game. I think good luck. I think Trump will continue to be Teflon man and just continue to bluster through and potentially, even run for president again. We'll see.
Well, he appears to still have that support base, right? And it doesn't seem like they're going to be swayed by anything that comes out. They're not really facts people.
Yeah, 100%. And, to give Flash a plug, Flash is kind of an interesting way to look at these issues because we have, a breadth of different news services. So if you turn on CNN, you'll see, one perspective on this. If you turn on Fox News, you'll see something completely different. And Fox sort of is arguing that this is, largely just a trumped up way to try and get at Trump and, and like he's saying, distract from other problems that are happening right now in America, that people have kind of moved on from this. So, it's a good way to dip in and see different perspectives on these kind of global news events. And
one of the questions at the centre of it is about, was this a 7-step plan to overthrow democracy? What's your take on that? Is it, is that what's going on, or is it just Trump being Trump?
Yeah, well, I think that they've done a pretty good job at laying out that case. So, everybody, I think, accepts that Trump helped to spark the riot on that day by, he made that speech, and that speech led to people, walking to the Capitol and breaking in and causing havoc and violence and, deaths came from it. But I don't think that everyone understands just how much this was planned. So Trump really did lay the groundwork for this kind of argument well before the vote even happened. It's part of his MO, and he did it actually in the election before that he won against Hillary Clinton. He said, if I don't win, it was rigged. So he knew that he was in a losing position for his second run at the presidency, and was laying the foundation for this kind of it was stolen argument well before, and that's all on the record. Questioning the validity of mail-in ballots because of COVID and all that kind of stuff. He had it all set up before, and then when they were in this losing position, then, the strategy got turned on to just go out there and question the validity of the results. So I think that I think it's true that he did have a plan. So whether the rest of America agrees, we'll see.
And he seems like he has a plan now. Do you think the plan is leading to 2024? Are we going to have to sit through another Trump campaign?
I don't know. I think if he ran, he would be a good chance, especially against Biden, who is deeply unpopular. But I just don't know that he really wants the job again that badly. Yeah. I think he wants the prestige and kind of to win, but I don't know that he wants to do that job anymore. What do you think?
Yeah, well, it doesn't seem like he had a great time in the White House, does he? Why would you want to do it again? Why would anyone want to do it?
Yeah, especially because he's still copying it.
Yeah. But he surprised us last time, so who knows?
That's true. He's unpredictable. We'll see. Love hearing us talking about the biggest and smallest headlines of the week. Make sure you follow Flash on the socials so you don't miss any content. We're at Flash News AU on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube. Get on it. Back home now, and the dust has just settled on the federal election, and Labor's opened up about the tactics it's used to defeat Scott Morrison. The party's National Secretary, Paul Erickson, was at the National Press Club this week, and he argued that the key to Albo's victory was exploiting the unpopularity of ScoMo to sway undecided voters. He said that voters were haunted by the idea of 3 more years of ScoMo. What do you think? Was that the key thing, Liz?
I think that's it. I think it's pretty accurate. This address to me is such an odd thing. It's a very Canberra thing. It's called, I think his speech was called the campaign director's address, and it could have been just gloating, just kind of how we won, how we did it. But it was actually really interesting. It gave some really interesting insights into the campaign, into why they believe they won. And this guy's the campaign director. He's kind of behind all the strategy. So of course he's going to be talking about all of the great things they did, all the wonderful successful strategies that they had. But I think it was Morrison that lost the election. It was a coalition loss more than a Labor win. And I think if you look at particularly early on in the campaign, all of the kind of little stuff-ups that Albo had, you can't really say that they ran a flawless campaign. Also, if you look at the seats that the coalition lost, a lot of them they weren't all won by Labor. A lot of them went to the independents. In some cases, some really surprising cases, particularly in Queensland, went to the Greens. So I think that, yes, it's true that voters were haunted by, the idea of 3 more years of a Morrison government, but whether the Labor campaign can say that that was a real, solid victory for them, I feel like, they kind of just sat back and let it happen to an extent.
Yeah, I think that's right. It was something that you could just coast on.
Yeah.
That they didn't have to do much.
And they did it really well.
Yeah, which, I think that there was some clever strategy in not over-egging that and just letting it play out.
Yeah.
And letting people's feelings about ScoMo just play out. Another interesting thing that he had to say, he had some quite strong comments about the coalition's approach to China that I thought was noteworthy.
The coalition's response was irresponsible and immature. Assertions that the Chinese Communist Party were backing Labor, warmongering rhetoric on Anzac Day, talk of red lines, and failed attempts to suggest Labor opposes the AUKUS arrangement. This followed February's Manchurian candidate silliness, which left the minority of the electorate who are not dedicated fans of 1960s psychological thrillers featuring Frank Sinatra scratching their heads. Within a week, Labor released our detailed plan to restore Australia's place as the partner of choice for countries in the Pacific. The contrast couldn't have been clearer, and voters reached the inescapable conclusion that the coalition had completely dropped the ball.
Yeah, I thought that was an interesting moment in the election, especially given what happened with the Solomon Islands, smack bang in the middle of the campaign, where the Solomons signed this deal, for extra support from China. I think it made some of the coalition's normal arguments about we're the strongest on defence, we're the toughest guys in the room, a little bit harder to prosecute. Do you think that was crucial?
Yeah. I don't think it's an issue for every voter, but I know that, from what we see in our audience at news.com.au, we've got a massive audience, a huge number of Australians look at our stories, and when there are stories about the impact that China's actions can have on Australia, there's a lot of interest there, and I think there's a lot of fear there. And so I think what Labor really exploited was highlighting the really strong stance that the coalition was taking, and I think that stoked a lot of fear of people starting to question, are we really taking the right approach here? Do we really kind of want to be messing with these guys too much? And I think it really did work in their favour. And that Solomon Islands issue, it did seem to come at the right time for Labor.
Yeah. And they exploited it pretty strongly.
It was a good opportunity where they could show their differences, because often when these are big foreign policy situations, it's the kind of thing where in most cases they'd say we're 100% taking a bilateral approach, we're all in agreement, but there's just kind of subtle differences in the way that the two parties approach the relationship with China, and I think they were really able to kind of highlight those.
And now that Labor is, now that they've won and they are in power, they have been on the front foot at trying to repair some of these relationships, with China, but also with some of the Pacific nations. So they are putting their money where their mouth is. I also wanted to ask you, given that Labor is now in power, but man, they're copping it, right? As soon as they got into power, all of these myriad impossible problems have landed at their feet that have been, coming for a long time, but now bam, cost of living. Interest rate rises, inflation out of control, and now bloody power, some unsolvable power crisis. Would you even want to have won?
Tough time for a new treasurer, hey? All of those issues just kind of culminating at once. And I think the one thing that could have, it clearly didn't get the coalition through the election campaign. But the one thing that they had that was making people happy was that cut to the fuel excise, and that's something that's going to have to go very soon. So yeah, the government already has to make some deeply unpopular decisions. I think it was really interesting. Also, we said that Albo made a great move in addressing those relationships with the Pacific nations early on. It was basically win the election, hop on the plane, get over there and, start talking about those issues. But I thought it was also quite odd that while he was over there, he was almost straight away saying, I'm not going to be talking about domestic issues while I'm working on these projects, while I'm overseas, which I thought was such a strange approach to have been made the Prime Minister of Australia and then immediately say, basically, I'm not talking about Australia. I wonder how many people picked up on that, but I thought it was really strange when there now, it was only a few days, but now there are so many domestic issues absolutely heating up. Look, I don't know why anyone would want any of these jobs, to be honest.
Same.
I am not putting my hand up for all of this responsibility, all of this criticism, pretending that you can somehow fix cost of living. Really, what governments do has very little impact on these. It's the economy, it's market forces, it's
the war
not
in Ukraine.
It's not a fun position to be in.
No, I wouldn't do it for quids.
Yeah.
We'll continue sitting in these chairs and criticising from here.
Exactly.
That's more our speed. Liz, this is the part of the podcast where we like to give a plug to Flash. For those who aren't aware, it's a news streaming service. I work for it every day. You're just the guest today. Maybe one day we'll get you over here. But yes, we like to talk about what's coming up. And one show I wanted to shout out this week is there's a new show from Erin Molan that's debuting on Sky News on Sunday night at 7 p.m. So Erin Molan, she's in everything but a bath. She's like a radio host. She does columns for the Daily Telly, and now she's got her own show. It's called Erin, replacing Sharry Markson's show. And I'm looking forward to seeing it. We had a chat to her this week to promote the show, and she's a really sort of genuine person, really an open book, and really interested in national affairs and politics. So it'll be interesting to see how she goes in a show like this.
Yeah.
So that'll be one to watch out for this week.
She's not going to hold back.
No, she's
I'm
not.
excited to see what she has to say.
Yeah, I think we'll see a different side to her in this kind of show. And people probably more know her from like her sports journalism, footy show host, and all that sort of stuff. So we'll get to see a different side of her. So I think that's going to be really good.
Exciting.
Liz, we've come to the end. Thank you so much for coming on the
Already?
show. Yes, I know, right? We could have talked for another hour, I reckon, but we'll save the listeners that.
We'll take it offline.
Thank you so much. I believe you'll be back next week. I'm putting you on the spot.
I will. I'll commit here and now.
Very good. Okay, we've got her. Thanks a lot. All right, well, we'll talk to you next week. Remember, here at Flash and Flash Drive, it's all about the news you need, how you want, and when you want it. Catch you later. If you enjoy the news and this podcast and want to learn more about Flash, you can sign up at flashnews.com.au. Flash lets you stream more than 25 news channels in one place. New customers get 14 days free. Start streaming your news today.